Okay, hi everybody. As promised, this is the second of two tutorials on InDesign to help you with Project 1, laying out these pages for your components of spatial design project. So this one's going to be a little different than the last one. As I said, the last one kind of addressed the technical issues, where the tools are, how to use them, how you set things up to make an effective and efficient layout in InDesign. This one's going to be, well, more about the process of how you do that, the iterative process. And because of that, that's going to be kind of a window into my brain, like it or not. It's not going to be quite as organized, might be a little messy. It's just about the process that I go through when I start a design process on a project like this, whether it's a 2D design process or whether it's a three-dimensional spatial design problem. So a couple things to begin with. First, you need to learn to talk to yourself. Okay, that's what this tutorial is about. This is kind of my mental process that I go through. You need to become your own best critic. We spent lots of time in the studio talking about what you've done so far, right? The faculty and your teachers and TAs have given you feedback and said, yeah, this works, this doesn't work. And we've gotten you to make some comments, which has been great because you guys have participated a lot. But I just want to encourage you to really think about becoming your own best critic, because ultimately, as you go through this design process, whether it's 2D or 3D, you need to learn to look at your work, step back, look at it, evaluate it, and decide whether it works or it doesn't work. All of us fall in love with our own ideas, right? When we create something, we think it's brilliant. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So let's talk a little bit about that. So talk to yourself. Don't tell your parents I told you to do that. Oh, wait, this is going to be posted as a public video on YouTube, so whatever. But you really need to go through that process. We talk about as metacognition, thinking about how you think, understanding your own thought process. And I also want to tell you that, people that think they know everything don't talk to themselves. There's nothing really to talk about, right? They've got everything figured out. There's nothing left to be said. But if you want to be a lifelong learner, if you really want to think about and learn from your mistakes and get better every time you do something, every time you work through the design process, then you should get in the habit. There is no formula. There's no one right way to do things. And if somebody tells you there is, then you should run the other direction as quickly as possible. There are so many options and so many possibilities in design. So what I'm going to do in this tutorial is we're going to start with what you see in front of you and do a little critique. This is the original design layout that I had for Point. I showed it to you in class, and I'm going to pull up a screen capture and do a little annotation and talk about this. And then I'm going to walk you through how I would take this same information and come up with a couple other designs just to show you the process that I go through. And you may decide that one of the other couple designs that I show you is actually better than this one, and maybe they are. I don't know. But it's just to show you there's more than one way to do things. And as long as you understand why you're doing something, and as long as you really think about the message and what you're trying to communicate, you can create lots of different options, whether it's on a page layout, whether it's in the design for a space or a neighborhood or a city park, whatever it is. You just have to think about those options, and you really have to be intentional and thoughtful about how you do that. So let's take a look at this one. I've got a little snippet of this pulled up here. And so when I did this project or layout, I was thinking about a couple things. Remember, we talked about in class, you really have to think about the message. What is it you're trying to communicate? None of this really matters unless you can communicate the message to the people that you're trying to talk to. So in this one, I thought, okay, I'm going to take this approach. In addition to laying out the basic, header information, got my logo over here. And by the way, we'll come back and talk about that in a second. I've got my footer information. Let's talk about what happens in the page. So I thought in this case, I would start with basically this information here. So I've chunked that together, and this is really background and context. It's the definition of what point means in landscape architecture and in 3D spatial composition. Then I've clearly, like you are, you're picking a place on campus. You're choosing that because it represents that concept, that theory. And then I'm describing that place so that as someone reads this, they understand here's what point means, here's this place, and then I'm going to go on to explain why I think this place represents that concept. Okay, and then you can see basically in terms of the layout, switch to another pen, in this particular layout, I've kind of got, you know, two halves here. Although they're not exactly equal, I've kind of divided it vertically. So the core information in terms of background and context is right here on the left, and then over here I'm really talking about the analysis. Okay, so I've shown where the point feature is. I'm explaining all that in this text here, a little bit more about the space, and although this text is relating to that sketch image based on a photograph, I've also included this section down below here to create more information, and yet there is a kind of interesting connection between the description of the place in plan and the understanding in section. So in that way, that section is actually kind of linking together the background, the context, and the analysis of that place as it relates to the concept of point in the landscape. And so even little things like up here, remember we set up this heading, okay, that's sitting at the top. Well, there's a little more space in here than there is here because I want this to serve as a group. They're all lined, but I want this to read as a group. It's point, and here's a location. Then I go down into the description of the space, place or the component definition, then the description of the place, and also that happens to relate to the section down here. And I also have included a couple labels. I don't see the one here, but oh, there it is on plan. I don't have label here because that's about the analysis. Okay, so I've labeled the plan, I've labeled the section, and this is a case where when I get back to the InDesign project, I'll talk about the grids and where I went off and on and a couple other issues. So when I've looked at this, I'm thinking, well, I created this little logo. Yeah, I think it's cool. Just sketch it in Photoshop with a Cintiq pen. But this field, this image container actually goes all the way to here and all the way to here. But the image itself had some border around it. So I'll probably show you how to adjust this because I really would rather have that start here and here and go to here and go to here because visually that will make it a connection to this little graphic bar. And there's, you know, I included this line across here as a graphic element to separate the header from the body. Although if it's laid out consistently, you don't really need that. But I added these graphic bars in here. This one a little darker to relate to the point. Okay, this one a little lighter to relate to the graphic quality of that logo. And yet that and this over here kind of connect together. So we see that repetition of this same exact shape. Okay, that's one of the principles we talked about, repetition. We created that, and yet we also, so we've got repetition, and we've got contrast. Because although I repeated that form, I changed the value of it. So if I erase this, yeah, this is light gray, this is black. And so I've repeated the form, but I've contrasted the elements so that this connects to the dark tone and the thickness of the font that says point. This relates to the tone of the graphic logo that I've placed up there. Okay, some other elements of contrast. Contrasting the heading, different size, different style, boldface, same here. So I can look at this page and see component definition, place description, analysis. So I know that there's 3 chunks of information on this page. So the initial time I read it, that's helpful, but it's really helpful if I go back and say, okay, Professor Johnson just told me I should think about how to use point in this design. I need to go back and look at that report that we created the first 5 weeks of the semester. And when you go back to this page, you can go exactly to the information that you want. You don't have to try and figure out where it is on the page. And that's really important because ultimately it's about finding information. That's what we want to do in a page. And actually, I think I have a web page here. Clean up your mess. This is an interesting website. It's called visualmess.com. And I think I have a link to this on Angel, or at least it's in the lecture. But this kind of relates design. You can see these images. I had those in the lecture, which we talked about. But it talks about clean design. Several reasons for clean design. Reduce the effort needed to find information. And what informational needs do we have? Deciding relevance. Do I even care? Like, who cares? What is this? Why is this important? Getting an overview. What are the main ideas? What's most important? Basic comprehension. You know, we see an image, but what's the explanation of that? Whether it's a chart, a graphic, a photograph, and retrieving buried details. Every single page of text has lots of information in it, and you can't see it all at one glance. So how do we go in there and find out the details that we really need? And then in this case, it's kind of, this article is oriented toward brochures or kind of commercial production of information, graphic information. So it's talking about finding actionable details. But of course, on your project, if this is serves as a reference for you in future design projects, then you want to go and figure out what is the information I really need to use to apply to this design. So anyway, it's important that we're not just creating a nice, pretty, visually soothing composition. This is also about communicating information. And so understanding how to organize and group information is just as important as understanding how to group and organize visuals and text. Okay, that's what it's about. If you think this is an art project, you're missing half the reason for creating a pleasing composition. So don't forget that. We need to think about helping people find information, supporting visual thinking, and that's what all these principles are about that we've already talked about. Okay, so let's see, we'll go back to here. That's just a little information about this particular layout. As you'll see later on, if I go back to this piece right here, this is actually off the grid. I mentioned this in class, and that's off the grid because I needed a leader line to go up to here, and I didn't want to have it like come out here and back like this. So I pushed this text over this direction in order to accommodate that. Now I still aligned it horizontally, or vertically I should say, with that other text block. So even though it's off the grid vertically, because it's on the grid horizontally, it all fits together pretty well. So based on that kind of basic analysis of this first design, let's take a look at some of the other ones, and let's put together a couple alternate designs that'll work with this place. All right, so we're going to close that down. Let's go back to here. Okay, and okay, we've got our layers set up. Let's go to pages. I've actually got a couple alternatives, but I'm just going to jump down here to this page and start working on one of those. Now, as I do this, I'm going to copy and paste information from the other pages because that makes it a little faster for the tutorial. A couple things though I want to mention. I mentioned this in class the other day. First one, okay, I have a Word document here that has, and this is what you should be doing for Wednesday. Even though you only have to do a couple finished layouts, we want you to assemble all the information for each of these components. And if you do it this way, there's two parts. Talk about the text and then the graphics. I have a page for point, I have the definition, the text, place description. The rest of this is placeholder text, analysis, annotations, image labels. I have section and plan. All that information you can assemble in a Word document so it's ready to copy and paste into InDesign. Okay, and that's really important because if you do all the work to create this, laying out a page in InDesign is super fast. Once you get the basic layout, and even if you want to create some variations on a couple layouts, it doesn't take any time at all. But you do not want to be using InDesign and trying to figure out what picture do you need, what image do you need, what graphic, what drawing. I don't really know what I want to say about this. I'm going to type this into InDesign. That's not what InDesign is for. As I mentioned in the first tutorial, it's really about containers. So you prepare the information and then you bring it in and drop it into place. And therefore you can adjust the design and the layout based on the amount of information that you have, because you know when you do the initial layout you may not know how much text, how much verbiage you're going to have about one issue or another. And that may evolve as you go through the design process. So by collecting this information in a Word document, one, you're super organized. It's going to make the whole process more efficient. Two, if you put it in Microsoft Word, spell check it, have somebody proofread it, check the grammar, get all that done. When you're in InDesign, you don't have to think about that. Yeah, it does have a spell checker, but as I mentioned before, Microsoft Word is a word processor. That's what it's designed to do. Use it for that purpose. Then transfer the information into InDesign. It's about containers. It's about layout. It's not about production of original content. Okay, so put this information together in Microsoft Word and have it ready to go. Secondly, you need to organize your images. And so I had this folder, files for class. I didn't have it broken down this far, so I did this for this tutorial. So in images, I have line, and I have all the images that I need, the logo, the photographs, the annotations, whatever I need. Under point, I've got the same thing, bunch of different images. So go through, think about what you want to present as part of this page, and collect all that information and put it in a folder. I think you should know this from last semester, but just to remind you, InDesign creates links to content. Okay, when you paste text in there, well, that's fine. But when you put graphics or photographs in there, it's remembering the location to that image. And if you start moving it around, then it will break that link. In fact, I can jump back here just for a second, and you can see right here, I've got a bunch of different links in this document. These are all the graphics and images that have been produced outside of InDesign and that I've brought in here. And if you move one of these to a different location, you'll see a little symbol that looks like this triangle with an exclamation mark, and it'll say, I don't really know where that is. So that's important that you organize your graphics, your content ahead of time. If you have it all organized in a main folder called images, and then subfolders for every spatial design component, line, point, plane, volume, etc. Set up a series of folders, put everything inside there. Again, this will make creating the layouts in InDesign super efficient. If your stuff is spread all over 3 hard drives, a flash drive, box.net, Dropbox, and your pass drive, it's going to be a nightmare because every time you make a change or you move it to a different computer, it's not going to know where everything is. So please set it up this way, and that way you can go to the top level. In this case, it's files for class. I can copy that, back it up on a hard drive, a flash drive, my box folder, Dropbox folder, and everything is there. So when I open that document back up, it knows exactly where to find all those images. And if for some reason it changes because of the hard drive that Penn State Computers assigned to your flash drive, all you need to do is locate one image, and then InDesign is smart enough to look in the same place, and it will update the links for everything else. So it makes it really easy to manage, really easy to keep track of those things. So that's really important. And that will come into play next fall in 251 when you're using AutoCAD, because it's exactly the same thing. It uses externally referenced files, and you need to learn to manage those files and to keep them organized. Okay, so that's just something we need to think about. All right, so let's go back here and let's take on, let's say, a slight variation on this, where we're still going to start with the same general description and context information first, and then we're going to reorder the way that's presented. The last one, well, I think I closed that, but the last one we were dealing with kind of a vertical separation, left half, right half. Let's do top half, bottom half for this one. Okay, so let's hit W and show our grid. And I'm going to go back up to pages. Let's see, I think it's this one. That's our original. Okay, so I'm going to take this, and actually I haven't put the title, but you can see what I did up here. I basically used a square within this first grid of a photograph of the place so you could see what it was, because we want you to produce a drawing of that place. And that way this becomes kind of an identifier for what's going on in the rest of the page. So I'm going to select that, and that, copy it, come down here, and this is where I can do a paste in place. So if you're doing variations on a layout, this gives you a really quick way to do it. And you can see that that's lined up with the grid here, and it's lined up with the grid here. Okay, now if I go to the direct selection tool, you can see maybe that's not actually quite on there. So if you look, there's a little bit of a gap here. And so that gets back to how you fit objects. I'm going to show this in a couple other situations. I'm going to select this, right click, choose fitting, fill frame proportionately. So now at W, you can see that's filling that frame right up to that point. And that becomes a really important thing, as you'll see, particularly with the sketches where value and tone and texture comes into play. In the photograph, it just fills up the frame, so it's not too tough to figure out. But you'll also notice that I've grouped these two things together, and I haven't put this right down on the grid there because I kind of want this pulled up a little bit. I want it grouped with the title, and therefore it creates a little more separation from this line that I put in. So anyway, that's why I did that. Okay, good. So let's go back to this page, and I'm gonna just speed up things. Again, if I was doing this from scratch, I'd just be dragging, gonna copy that. And I'm going to do another paste in place just to get them there. Okay, now you can see in this case, these are lined up with the left border, the outside border, and the frame is lined up with the inside border. And this one's down off the grid there, and part of that reason is this grid line has this graphic on it. And because that graphic hits the line, anything that's over here really needs to move down a bit because otherwise it would be smashed right up against that graphic. So that kind of, there's a reason for going off the grid, moving that down to make that look correct. Now you can see that I actually have that text field lined up with this hang line, horizontal grid line there, but I've moved it down from the top to make that happen. Okay, now in this case, I'm going to take that same graphic, this one, and let's see if I can get that, and copy those. And I'll do a paste in place just so you can see it. Okay, so in this case, this is a bigger graphic that extends down beyond, but because this stops here and I want to go with a kind of a horizontal rows where I have the top and the bottom, I'm going to take this, and now I can scale this up to fit something like this, and you can see that that's, well, that's not exactly square there, but still that creates an you know, a pretty good form there. You also notice that I just changed the relationship of the graphic inside. If I undo this, I can also, I can right click on it and say fitting, fill frame proportionately. But if I want to resize this, I can also select it, hold the control key down, and it will rescale that graphic to fit into that space. Okay? So in this case, that's at the W, you know, that's still a little closer up there. Now I could move this down to try and line it up with there if I wanted to. I could right click on this, fitting, fill frame proportionally, and I can make that look a little better visually with that. Okay, either of those is probably okay because I'm going to add another graphic over here, but those are the kind of things you need to look at and talk to yourself about and just decide, okay, is this really going to work that way or not? That's part of the iterative process. Okay, I've got this plan graphic. In this case, I used to have it over here. If that doesn't work, I can slide it over here. And once you've got the move tool, you can also use the arrow keys. That's what I'm doing right now. And because that's sitting over top of that, I might even do that. Select all, 12 point. Just scale that down a little bit. So it identifies a plan, says it's not to scale, but it fits in over the basic grayscale area. So I'm not really worried about that fitting on the grid. I'm really looking at that in terms of how it fits to the graphic itself. Okay, so I've got my component definition, basically the same place. I've got this information laid out here, and now I'm going to, in this case, put the section information across the top. So before I had the section below this, and it kind of connected to that and the analysis. So in this case, I'm going to get that section. I'm going to copy that, and I will paste it. Well, before we do that, let's turn our grid on, choose paste. In this case, I'm not worried about pasting it into place, so I'm going to pull this over there. One of the nice things about the newest version of InDesign CC is it kind of gives you those alignments automatically. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to pull this all the way out to the border and line it up with the graphic. So let's turn this off. You can say, well, that's, when I see the frame, I can see that's lined up with exactly the same place that this image is. But when I turn this off, deselect it, well, it doesn't really look lined up, right? Because the graphic itself doesn't fill up that frame. So you can't just go by the borders of the edges of the container. You have to think about the graphic, and it's also kind of a little off center, right? Not big enough, so there's more space on the right than there is on the left. This is supposed to be in the center. I can fix that. But before I do that, I'm going to use the direct selection tool, click on that, and just hold the shift key down and scale this out. Then I'm going to move this around. So what I want is a section, and you can see as I move it around and up and down, I'm looking at this space, maybe move it this way a little bit, and I'm looking at this line. You can see if I move this up enough, I can't see the edge, but if I move it down until it gets cropped a little bit, like right there. Now, if you create your own graphics, you can solve that problem. You can add the shading down here, right? But if you're using a graphic from somewhere else, if I want this to appear lined up, then I have to move the image down until it's lined up with that graphic. Okay, then I'll go back to the regular selection tool, put this in the center. And now you can see that we've kind of got that lined up. The grid hasn't changed. It's just that I moved the graphic and scaled it within the graphics container to make sure that the tones in the image itself actually hit the borders of the container. So those two things are not exactly the same. So you have to really think about that, and that's important. Okay, so now I've got this same kind of idea. My component definition, my place description, I see a plan. I'm going to identify what that point object is there. And because I'm going to use the repetition of a graphic object, that circle with some red gradient, and this, I can connect the plan to the section. So here I can see there's buildings around this. I can see the axes, the stairs coming up. Now I can, over here, I can see the scale of the space, the fact that there's two-story buildings on either side, that it's actually kind of a sunken plaza. And so those two things are connected together visually, and that helps explain what you're looking at. Okay, so let's go back to, I think we've got that working pretty well, and you can see how I reproportion, rechange things. Let's go back to our original, and let's take this, I'm going to copy that, and paste that. Okay, so this is going to come down here, so I'm going to kind of fit that right in the bottom. And you can see that, well, I've kind of got a problem here, right? Okay, welcome to my brain. Yeah, that doesn't really work because this is here and that's there. And so what I really need to do is move this up to this level and this up to this level. Okay, this is why the grid is your friend. Now this, I've got space here and I like grouping, so I'm just going to move that up until that hits there. And this still works perfect because this is still general information, and the bold typeface on the heading separates the two groups. And now, yes, I need to move that up too. All right, I got that. get in that gray space right there. Okay, hit W. Yeah, that's still looking pretty good across there. Of course, now this is off, right? So let's choose that. And we'll go back to choosing the content. Okay, come on. All right, let me see here. No, nothing's locked. All right, we'll get this direct selection tool. Okay, there we go. So we've got the direct selection tool. We've clicked on the field. Now we can move that graphic up inside there. So you can right click on it and say rescale, fit, whatever. But in this case, this graphic actually contains some other images around it that I don't really want in the picture. So once I adjust the size of the frame, I need to relocate that picture, and then I'll go back to the regular selection tool, put that right there, hit W. All right, so now I've got this lined up pretty well. Now, one of the issues down here is we're going to fix this a little bit too. Let's go to the direct selection tool. Again, this graphic frame actually goes right to the edge of the grid. You can see the boundary there, but there happens to be some text on this. It's not my graphic, somebody else drew it. If it was yours, you might want to put maybe just a light gray background on this, because otherwise you can't really see where it hits. And putting borders on the frames, making boxes around everything, generally speaking, isn't a great way to do things. So we're going to try and avoid that. Now, the basic position of this, you can see, I fit it between the margin, which lines up over here on the left. And, you know, I could move this over to here, right? But then I have this perfectly static line that separates this. And what I'm trying to do is kind of connect the component definition, the place description, and the analysis together. So if I want to connect those together or overlap them, then why not make the graphic overlap? So I'm going to pull this out to here on the grid, leaving a little gutter here so I can put my text next to it. What I need to do, though, is just take this graphic. When I click on that with the direct selection tool, you kind of have to see the border here, and unfortunately it looks just like the grid. So I'm going to stretch this out a bit, and I'm going to move this over so it's kind of in the right position, but I'm positioning it so this text, I'm going to just use the arrow key. You can see that right here, I'm going to cut off here, and I'm going to cut off in this line. And therefore, when I go back to my view without, that creates this in a corner, and then implies that edge all the way across. And that's what you want. You want to make sure that you have enough there. Remember, we talked about proximity and be able to fill in those pieces which don't actually exist. And that's the way your eye works. That's what Gestalt perceptual psychology is based on, perceptual theory, and use it. So now we have this graphic which actually bridges the gap between these two. It connects them or overlaps them, kind of links them together. And we've got that visual connection that we're going to make with our verbal connection when we write out the text. Okay, and I can put the leader lines and all that stuff in. But anyway, just showing how now we have this. Well, let's finish the rest of that information. We'll go back to pages and this one. And you can see I've got my analysis and this. Copy that, paste it in here, hit W. So I'm going to come up here and drop that in there. And in this case, you know what? Because of the way I've reshuffled my graphics, my heading works perfect there. This flows down. I can have my leader lines coming into here. In this case, this, I don't really need this gap, right? So let's put our lines back on. I think in this case, I want to take that right back up to there. Or better yet, line it up with the top of this field vertically, but keep it on the grid here horizontally. So if we go back to W, now you can see this lines up right quite well right through there. And I have room to take a leader line up to here to relate to the section drawing, and I have room to take my leader lines down into here to identify the perspective sketch that I have there. And if I want to pull some of those in there, so let's go with that and that. Let's go back to here, paste those. Now, one of the things you'll find out as you're doing this, especially if you start editing, so I've got that in here. What do I need to do? Well, the first thing I need to do is figure out, did all these things transfer onto the right layer or not? So if I pick one of these, you can see that's on images, that's on body text. Wrong, right? Exactly. So let's move that, click, put it down on images, and immediately, because that stacking order is different, my graphic line comes through. Now, I don't know what that's on graphics. That's on graphics. Good. How about this? Images? Images? No, that's a graphic, right? So let's put that up there. And that helps me with the stacking order. So in this case, though, the other thing I want to do, because I need to move these, this leader line should come off of the first line, I think, and it should be over a little further. Well, I can do that, but if I select it, go to direct selection tool, try and select this point, I end up moving the graphic. That's not good. So what I want to do is go to the graphics layer or the images layer and lock it. So now I can't touch those. So if I go back to my direct selection tool, click this, select that. Well, let's move this over here. There we go. So I can pull that into there. I can pull that down to here. So all I did was drag a little rectangle, a selection marquee around that point once I got the direct selection tool. But again, in order to do that, if you have graphics under that, it will select that as well. So I had to lock those graphics. And you can lock a layer or you can lock a graphic. If I wanted to lock this graphic, I could select it. Try and unlock that, select it, right click, choose lock. And then if I put my W on, you can see that there's actually a little lock icon. If you want to unlock it, you just click that and it's unlocked. So that's if you want to lock individual pieces of the layout. If you want to lock an entire layer, you just click in that column in the layers panel and everything on that layer is locked. Okay, so you can kind of see how this layout's working. I'm not going to go through in this tutorial and put all the other arrows in, but in this case, I'd probably put it in from here to here. Got this coming down here, this coming down here, and actually, I can show you that in a second. Now, one of the things about this layout, I kind of like the top third, bottom 2/3. We almost have that rule of thirds thing going on. If you take the heading into account, it's a little more than that, but if you don't take the heading, it's kind of 1/3, 2/3 almost. That works pretty well. It really connects those together. I see the alignment with the text, but we talked about white space. That's that last principle. There's a lot of white space. It's almost like I'm missing something on the page. So here's a case where, let's put this down. I'm going to take this field, pull it up there a little bit. Maybe, again, I have kind of extra text in here that is just filler text. So I'm going to move this up to there. And ultimately, this is really one label for the section, so it doesn't really need too much. So I'm going to take another graphics box, and I'm going to put it in here. And in this case, I'm going to choose File and Place. Go to my images, point, and I have another picture, this one. Yeah, I'm going to put that in there. First thing I'm doing is go fitting, fill frame proportionately. And that's not bad, but I'm going to go in here and expand that, scale it up, and just kind of focus on a picture of what that point object is within the space. Okay, so I'm kind of looking at the horse and rider and the base and trying to do kind of 1/3, 2/3 thing with that a little bit. Looks pretty good. And if I wanted to, let's get rid of this, I could add a little caption in down here. That might help finish that out. Let's see, go back to here. Maybe I want to pull that down a little bit more, get another line in there. So anyway, you can adjust that, but here's a case where I would add another graphic to help explain what's going on, even though it may not be perfectly necessary, but it certainly helps explain. In the sketch, you can't really see that completely, and it's not actually in this section, but you could draw it in there, and then you could add it in here. So that helps balance out the proportion of solid objects, images, text to white space. Otherwise, this corner seems like it's kind of not complete, and that's perfectly legit to go in and do that. Okay, so there's one example of how you could take that and make some changes to that to make it work. Now, another approach, let's take a look at another approach. Let's go back to pages, and actually, I think I'll just talk about this one. You've kind of seen my iterative process that I've gone through. So this one is another variation on that, where I've actually taken, well, no, it's not this one. It's the one I just did. All right, let's go back to here. There we go. Yeah, so this is similar to the first one. What's the difference? Look at it. Think about it a bit. I'll give you a second. Kind of vertical split, right, between two chunks of information, the analysis, the background description. Yeah, you got it. The difference is they're reversed order. So we've got the analysis, the perspective, sketch, and image, and the analysis on the left. That's what you see first. Then you move over to the component definition, the place description, and like I tried to do in the first one, the plan and the section relate to each other in terms of description, but they also connect into the analysis. So it links all that information together. And after all, that's what we want you to do. We want you to think about what is the component of spatial design, what's the place, where is it, how do you describe it, and then how are you illustrating how that component is used within that space. So always try and think about how you connect those together. And remember I talked about this logo? Yeah, about that logo. So let's deal with that. Let's go to our direct selection tool. Let's make this a little bigger and move it out there. Maybe a little bigger. So that's still lined up. Let's pick our direct selection tool. Again, I drew this kind of in a, a bubble in Photoshop. I didn't really know how big it was. So there I'm actually expanding it out so that that logo, as opposed to this one, which doesn't quite meet the edges, right? This one now gets cut off right at those borders and actually fits, oops, sorry. It actually fits within that page a little bit better and relates to the proportion over here. And I'm going for repetition, right? Repetition, contrast. Those are things I want to create. So anyway, this is another alternative. You can see that, again, if I put the grid on, this one actually comes off the grid just like the other one did. This one's right on the grid. Although, okay, come on, be honest, give me your critique. Right, there's the grid, there's my image. Stops a little short, right? Down here, doesn't really make it to the bottom. So let's fix that. Let's take this. Let's make that a little bigger. There we go. Let's move it over. Get it a little more balanced side to side. Bring it down. Now we've got that line happening in there a little bit better. Even this, let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, I'm not going to adjust the arrows, but you can see I want it to hit this edge, and this edge. I want that cut off so I can see that line that happens everywhere. That's just a little adjustment that's going to work. All right, let's put this on. Same thing. You know, this is off the grid, but it doesn't, this text creates a hard line visually, and it doesn't line up with that. So let's fix that. You can fix it. You can do what you want. You're in control here. All right, so I pulled that up, and in the process of doing that, I also pulled this out, maybe even a little more, right? Why not? A little more. Now that graphic cuts off the edge here as well. So I don't have those little white spatial gaps in between everything. Those are the little details you need to look at. Create the layout, get it to work. Okay, those things I just did, they don't really affect the overall layout of the space at all. They're just little details that will make a difference, because when someone looks at this, they want to relax. Their visual system doesn't want to work hard. They just want to find the information they need and enjoy looking at it. So make that process simple and easy. So always an iterative process. Go through this, try 1 or 2 or 3 alternatives, and then once you've got the basic layout done, go back, refine it, make sure it really works. So in this case, let's look at this. There's one option, there's another option, there's another option. Okay, 3 pages, they all work, they all follow those same principles we talked about in class, but they're completely different. Okay, same information, same content. So don't use the grid to help you be creative. Don't use it to constrict what you can do, but really think about the content, really think about the message, connect the information together. This isn't about making a pretty picture. It's about making a pleasing visual composition that communicates clearly and effectively. And as a designer, that's something you need to learn to do. All right, I hope this helps.